Doug, welcome to the Airfleet Debrief. We're going to be talking about something people can learn in 15 minutes or less. Are you up for the challenge?
Absolutely.
All right. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself and why we should listen.
I am a 20-year veteran of the software as a service industry, both as a chief marketing officer, sometimes head of product, and on one occasion, head of sales. So been there, done that, and then have spent the last year and a half as a fractional chief marketing officer, helping organizations very similar to my background in SaaS, helping them find that next level of breakout growth.
I love that multidiscipline background that I didn't really know about. We've worked together, so that's weird. So thank you for sharing that. So the thing I was hoping you could talk about today is something I watched you do when you came into Caliber Mind, and you did it really well and got everybody on board, and I was so impressed. And that was really relooking at the ICP in a way that everybody kind of collectively agreed with. So if you could kind of walk us through that, or maybe first why it's important to the website.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll tell you what, and it's, by the way, let's just agree that your ideal customer profile is not a static thing, and it's not unusual to come back and take another look. You've done some really excellent work as well, Camel, on defining the ICP for Caliber Mine. Um, just a little bit of sort of why that's so important for the website as well. If you think about what we're hoping for with a great website, we're hoping to attract an audience to outweigh the cost of all the other things we do, right? We want a really low cost customer acquisition cost website. So lots of SEO, lots of great content, bringing people in and engaging them. When you actually brought me in at Caliber Mine, what was clear is that we looked like we were paying a little bit too much attention to parts of the market that weren't converting as well as others, meaning our ideal customer profile had shifted. And you talked about, getting everybody on the same page. Well, I'll tell you what, one thing I'd recommend is, pay attention to the culture around you when you're thinking about how to go and find that ICP. And in the case of Caliber Mine, it is a very evidence-based, collaborative, and data-driven culture. At the same time, there's a lot of really good information out there that you're not going to get by looking at CRM data or
Mhm.
looking at your marketing performance data. And that's really the subjective, qualitative information you get by going and talking to prospects and customers. So that's really the setup. It is look at the culture, making sure you understand how they make decisions. In Caliber Mind's case, very data driven, to lean into data in that case, and then using that voice of customer and prospect information. And that's really the foundation. We can sort of talk about how that evolved and how that turned into a really good ICP process and a really good ICP.
Yes, I would love to dig into the technical side a little bit more because what I've noticed in organizations, and this doesn't apply to Caliber Mind, but what happens a lot of times, especially in early stage startups, is we have usually a founder who has experience selling into their network and really wants to lean heavily on that to define their ICP. What are some other places we should be looking instead of past experience?
Wow, that's a tougher one, right? This is sort of that product to market fit. You've got a founder-led seller, and that's the norm, right? It's pretty rare we don't have founder-led sales happening, especially as we're bootstrapping more and more with the startups. So you don't conveniently have that data set that we had at Caliper Mind. So where do you go find that information and find that data? So the first thing I would say there is that you're still able to get data. Specifically, you're still able to test hypotheses. And so in the founder-led sales scenario, what I would highly recommend is for every sales motion that a founder-led seller, so in this case the founder has, their goal should be to have 5 other conversations in their perspective ICP to validate that ICP. So it really does lean into the qualitative side of things. And the other is, frankly, at the end of the day, it's unusual that we're creating new segments with new products out there. It does happen, especially in AI. We're seeing a ton of it. So there are data sets out there. You've got your Zoom infos. You've got a lot of data out there where you can at least start to rationalize what it looks like for the prospect. In other words, you can create, if you will, a persona or a set of personas from that data against which you can sort of test your marketing motions as you do them. That's a lot for a founder, though, right? I mean, think about that. They're bootstrapping. They're trying to get all this work done. So this is really, I think, suggestions for that first marketer in the door, and that person's usually hired pretty early as well.
I love that. So let me walk through another scenario I often see in earlier, well, kind of, I would say Series B to C. So we've kind of figured things out, but things are maybe in flux a little bit. And what I've noticed is we still have that tendency to lean heavily on input from sales and maybe a founder if they're still around. And we don't always necessarily have that information in our systems to pull that ICP information against. What are some systems out there that you recommend bringing in? And maybe I can weigh in just a tiny bit here too.
Yeah, I have to say at this point, I'm not even thinking about systems per se. I think the scenario you're putting in front of me, Kamala, is that you've just still don't have that data. I would challenge that and say in the B and C rounds, you should have data, right? So that's still something I would lean into pretty
I'll
heavily.
clarify in a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But I would also say that, if failing all else, I think sellers as a proxy is a really good starting place. I wouldn't ignore what this, I mean, your risk there is that the sellers tend to be the most efficient employees in any building. They're going to go to the thing that's going to drive business the most quickly. And that's not always, quite often that is the case, that's the right market. But it's not always the right market, and you could be missing things. So, as to bring back Caliber Mind, it was a lot easier sell for smaller organizations who needed Caliber Mind's attribution product. It was a faster sell, but they were churning faster because they didn't have a level of sophistication necessary to retain the product. So that is your risk, that the sellers are going to go to, say, the SMB or the commercial market because it's a faster sale. And then you're going to have, is that your ICP? I argue no, but it's a starting point in terms of defining what the ICP is.
I really love what you did. I'm glad you brought that up because what I was really impressed by is you didn't just focus on ICP, you looked at ACP and UCP, or acceptable customer profile and unacceptable customer profile. I think we get what unacceptable customer profile is, but if you could go into both of those and kind of how to find them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the meridian line, whatever you want to call it, is always a little different between the ICP and the ACP for every company, of course. Um, and then UCP also tends to be really fuzzy because quite often it can hide as ICP. So let me unpack that. The first thing you're looking at is this: what is your CAC relative to your lifetime value? That to me is always the meridian line, right?
Mhm.
So what does it cost? So it can cost a tremendous amount of money to land an ICP account. But if their lifetime value is, 2.5, 3 years and you have low churn, that CAC to LTV ratio is actually very strong. Where you start seeing that ACP dividing line is you're going to see things like maybe a little bit more churn. You're going to see that your CAC to LTV ratio is very different. So in the case of CaliberMind, CAC to LTV was fantastic for ICP. It was really super, super clear. Now, here's the other thing, though. Let's talk about UCP. UCP can be very sneaky, especially, let's go back to your original question around founder-led sellers. It can be really sneaky because these are the folks that will give you lots and lots of money, and there's ifs, ands, or buts attached to that engagement, meaning, your product's pretty darn close, but if you could do all these things. And so UCP is also looking at the COGS, cost of goods sold, plus the customer acquisition cost, plus the lifetime value. And so UCP quite often can show up and look like a fantastic customer, but they require a level of configuration of your product or customization that takes you away from other markets. And they can be nasty and ugly, and we've all had them in our portfolios before. We've been like, we signed, I'm going to throw a name out there. IBM, we're so excited. 2 years later, you're underwater, and IBM doesn't help you attract other customers. That's UCP.
Okay, so let's dig into the data thing I brought up just a little bit more. So what I've noticed in B2C stage companies is a reliance on a lot of different data points without checking to see whether or not we're consistently converting at a higher rate on each of those. So what I see is people get it really dialed in, and they may be absolutely right, but they're relying on a title or something that's very specific that may not be spelled the same. And when you have normalization, it's a little bit easier. But what I find is when we're trying to get down to the nitty gritty, if you have a lot of churn happening in the industry in terms of employment and a lot of other information, that can get a little bit problematic. So what I encourage people to do is absolutely take the feedback, do your research, and in your research, you're probably going to find data points you consistently have that are there. But watch out for adding too many things in without verifying that it's consistently performing well, is my only warning I'd throw out there.
I think that's really sage advice, Kamala. I think that, and what I failed to mention in trying to fit a pretty meaty topic into just a few minutes
I
is
know.
you're starting with a hypothesis and you're using either the sellers or customer interviews. And I know this feels overwhelming, but I have to tell you, it all fits together so well when you do this work, right? Or you're looking at something, the data specifically in CRM, and you're seeing some condition change favorably. So in this case, I talked about caliber mine and seeing that not only was churn lower, but upsell was so much higher. And so that was the first data point. It was to say, ooh, that's really interesting. What do the accounts have in common that are doing a lot of purchasing of additional software? And that's exactly your point. Go and test that hypothesis and then sort of layer on other conditions. But I'll tell you, a really good ICP model might only have two conditions, right? If you're getting into 3 and 4 and 5 conditions, it's too complex to communicate outside of the four walls of marketing. And it's way too hard to operate against. And so, yes, I agree. Start with that single point, sort of build on it. And the most elegant models sometimes only had two parameters.
So another thing I like that you mentioned up was paying attention to the culture. So I will be transparent. My background as an individual contributor and somebody who has a bias for immediate action didn't always wasn't always the most perfect thing with a collaborative culture. So tell us a little bit about how you walked people through the process and made them part of it.
Yeah, that's gosh, I just talked about the 90% that's important for feeling comfortable about what you're proposing. We just talked about that.
Mhm.
That last 10% can be killer. And that's really what you're talking about, right?
Yep.
So, like, I think job one is you're always the least brilliant person on every single call. And you are. And I don't care how smart and experienced you are. And so the tactic that I use is to make sure, even if it's your idea, make it their idea as much as you can. Right. And I think, Kim, we've experienced this, right? When we've been in these meetings before, like take a kernel of idea, even if you polish it in front of them, you come back and go, wow, this is really something. The other piece is to involve them where you can in that journey. Don't make it a black box. In other
Mhm.
words, so hey, put people on customer interview calls, right? Have record the calls. Be like, hey, this is what I found. So just sort of share that. And if people don't have time, which quite often they don't, put yourself in a collaborative situation. I love Miro boards, and I love sort of setting up those conversations early, so you're not plopping everybody into the Miro board and going, "Hey, let's do all this stuff together. Let me blow that top of your head off at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday." Do some time doing some prep, and then make sure they understand what's in it for them. So what's in it for them, and then make it their idea as much as you can.
Like marriage. If it's the other person's idea, it goes over a lot better.
It does.
Thank you, Doug. We're at time already. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I know I got something from it, and I hope our audience did too.